Hello everyone, and welcome to the first of a few videos that is going to go over and revise the business curriculum for Leaving Cert. Today we're going to have a look at business law, which is Unit 1. So a couple of tips: pause whenever you need, screenshot whenever you want. I would say watch the video one time without taking notes, and then take notes on your second watch, and try the review questions in your head before you write them down. So what we're going to cover, we're going to look at stakeholders, contracts, consumer conflict, and industrial relations and employer-employee conflict. So starting with stakeholders, what is a business? It is an organization that provides goods or services, and it is affected by many people called stakeholders. And a stakeholder is anyone with a vested interest in a business or that is affected by a business. You have different types of stakeholders. An entrepreneur sets up the business and takes a big financial and personal risk. If the business fails, they might lose all their money and they put a lot of time and energy. So it's a personal risk. And 1 in 3 new Irish businesses fail within the first 5 years. There's a big risk there. An investor is someone who provides money for the business called capital for a return on investment. Basically, they want to get a profit as well. They can give you debt capital, which is loans, and you pay back interest. Like when you go to the bank and you get a mortgage, you have to pay a bit of interest. Or they give you equity capital, which is they get a share of the profit of the business in a dividend. This is where we get stock markets from. And it's also, if you watch Dragon's Den, then you see people asking for a share of the business in exchange for money. An employer is someone who hires others to work for them. An employee is someone who works for an employer for money. An entrepreneur is an employee who suggests new ideas. For example, after Sony made the PlayStation, there were some employees in Xbox who pitched the idea of making a Microsoft PlayStation to Bill Gates, and that's how they made the Xbox. A manager is someone who runs the business, who has to motivate staff, and who has to achieve the goals of the business. We'll have a look at that in Unit 3. A producer is someone who makes a finished good from scratch. So Tato and Cadbury, they make chocolate and crisps and they sell them straight to consumers. A consumer is a customer. They buy the goods and services, and they also give good market feedback for the employer. They can see what are consumers buying most, how much are they spending. A supplier is someone who sells goods to a business. So Brennan's Bread sells bread to Tesco, to SuperValu, to other supermarkets. And a service provider is someone who offers extra help. So if a business wants to have a bookkeeper, but they don't want to hire someone to do it, they can ask these service providers to do it for them. So accountants, business consultants, etc. So interest groups are organizations that campaign for a shared goal. They can make protests, or they can boycott companies, or they can lobby and influence politicians to bring out laws in their favor. Some examples is the Irish Business and Employers Confederation, which represents employers, the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, which represent trade unions, the Irish Farmers Association, and the Irish Creamery and Milk Suppliers Association. They both represent farmers, and the Consumers Authority, Consumer Association of Ireland, which represents consumers. You can have cooperative relationships, which is when parties work together in a win-win situation. So a producer might make a really good quality product and the consumer will buy that and they'll recommend it to their friends. Or you can have competitive, which is where the parties oppose each other and there's a rivalry, there's a win-lose scenario. For example, an employee might want higher pay, but the employer wants to cut costs. Only one person's going to win. So a couple of review questions. If you want to screenshot this, try them yourself just in your head. And we're going to have a look at contracts. So a contract is a legally binding agreement between two or more parties. Each person promises to do something for the other person, and it is enforceable by law, meaning if someone breaks the contract, the person who didn't break it can get compensation. There are 8 elements. You have your offer, which is a proposal to make a deal, and it's legally binding if you accept it, but it's not an invitation to treat. An invitation to treat is something like a price tag or an ad or something in a shop window. It's not legally binding. For example, if you see a car with a price tag of 17.5, you can't buy it for 17.5 euro. That might mean 17.5 thousand euro. It's just an invitation to negotiate, basically. Your second is acceptance, which is you agree to all terms. If you make any changes, that's a counter offer and your original offer ends. So if you get an offer for 40,000 to work at a job, but you ask for 45,000 and you get rejected, you can't go back to asking for 40,000. Third is your consideration. This is the actual thing of value that's exchanged. So an employer would pay money to an employee and the employee gives work for the employer. Now, social or casual promises, like if someone says they'll go on a date with you, this doesn't count unless you paid them, which is potentially prostitution and against the law. And your fourth is your intention. Both people have to intend for it to be a legal contract. So your mom telling you to walk the dog for a fiver, there's no legal intention. She's not going to sue you if you don't walk the dog. Fifth is your capacity to contract. So you have to be legally able to contract. Minors aren't capable. People who are under the influence of drugs or alcohol aren't incapable. People who are mentally ill, international diplomats, or directors of designated activity companies acting ultra vires, basically going beyond their power. Sixth is your consent to contract. You have to freely agree to the contract. You can't be pressured, you can't be deceived, you can't be forced, you can't be coerced. Seventh is your legality of form. Some contracts have to be in writing if you're getting a mortgage for a house or a hire purchase for a car. And last is your legality of purpose. Your contracts have to be for something legal. You can't make a contract for doing drugs, you can't make a contract for a getaway driver, etc. So termination, ending a contract, you can do this by performance, which is the best case scenario. Both people do exactly what they were told. Your agreement is when you agree to end things early. Frustration is when something unexpected happens that you can't carry out the contract, like someone dies, someone gets sick, employer goes bankrupt. A breach is when one party breaks the terms of the contract. And if there's a condition of a contract, this is a major breach, your contract will end. For example, a football player, it says in their contract they can't miss a match. If they miss a match, the contract is broken. But a warranty is something small and the contract keeps going. So if the player misses training, this might be a warranty. Their contract doesn't end, but they can still get fined. So your solutions, your remedies for breaches of contract, you can get damages, which is just getting your money back. So if a singer cancels a gig, a promoter might sue them for €500 for paying them to play the gig and a little bit extra for inconvenience. You can get specific performance where you have to actually do what you're asked of again. So if the singer cancels a gig, they have to perform it as agreed in the first place. Or you can get recession, which is when you cancel the contract and everything goes back to what it was before. So if the singer cancels due to an illness, they have to repay the €500 to the promoter, but they both walk away the same as they were before the contract was even a thing. Here's a couple of review questions for you about contracts. Now we're going to have a look at consumer conflict. So consumer rights and responsibilities. Caveat emptor is a Latin phrase that means let the buyer beware. Basically, consumers should use common sense. If you're buying a pair of shoes, try them on first. If you're buying tins of paint, get a test sample. And there's no automatic remedy if you dislike something. Disliking a product isn't a claim for getting remedy. You can get genuine conflicts from poor quality products or services, overpriced products or services, bad customer service, and you can there are two solutions. There are non-legislative and legislative solutions. Non-legislative means there's no law involved. It's technically legal, but you can still solve your issues. You can have negotiation, which is where you talk with the business directly, you discuss and agree a solution, or you can go to the Consumers Association of Ireland. They advise you on your rights and what steps you should take next, and they also lobby, persuade the government for better consumer protection. You can have legislative methods, meaning the laws involved. You have the Sale of Goods and Supply of Services Act 1980, Consumer Protection Act 2007, the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, the CCPC, the Small Claims Court, or the Ombudsman for Public Services. Now, the Soga Sosa, I'm going to call it that, goods have to be of merchantable quality, they have to be good quality, they have to be fit for the purpose intended. If you get a kettle, it has to boil water, has to match any samples that you might see beforehand, and it has to be as described. If they say it does something, it has to do that thing. Services have to be carried out by someone who has the right qualifications. They have to carry it out with good care and attention. They have to use materials of merchantable quality. So a hairdresser has to use a scissors, has to use a razor that is of merchantable quality. And if they sell you anything else as part of your service, maybe in a spa treatment, and they sell you a face cream, that has to be of merchantable quality as well. So you're entitled to redress if the previous aren't met. You can get a refund, which is your money back. You can get a replacement, which is a new product that's the same, or you can get a repair and the original product is restored. It's the retailer's responsibility to deal with redress. They can't tell the consumer to contact the manufacturer of the product. They also can't put up any illegal signs like no refunds. And a guarantee on a product, so you get a washing machine and there's a 5-year guarantee, that doesn't take away your right to a refund if you can argue for one. And if a business sends someone something that they did not order, then the person can keep it after 30 days if they let the business know and they don't respond, or they can keep it after 6 months if they don't let the business know and the business doesn't reach out to them. So Consumer Protection Act 2007, I'm actually just going to hold this whole thing because the prohibited practices is already there. So this protects consumers from unfair business practices, and it applies to business consumer interactions, not businesses amongst themselves. Practices are unfair if they mislead consumers, if they're aggressive, or if they're just prohibited by law, if they're illegal. Your penalties is that the consumer can sue and get money back, compensation, or the CCPC can give the business fines, they can prosecute the business, or they can name and shame them in a known list of illegal businesses. So your misleading practices are false claims about the product's quality, where it's from, what awards it's won, the price of the product, has to include taxes. I know in America this is different. They do taxes by state, and it also has to be for genuine sales only. This obviously doesn't apply to maybe if you're buying illegal substances. And also if about the advertising. So Dunn Stores says always better value, but Aldi was able to actually claim that this wasn't the case by showing different products and how they weren't always better value. Or now on social media, where you have a hashtag ad on any ads, if this is hidden, this can be misleading. An aggressive practice involves pressure, harassment, coercion, intimidation. So if a builder is doing work on an older person's home and they do extra stuff and they demand them to pay for unnecessary work, or if a funeral home sells a really expensive coffin because they say, listen, your dead relative would have really loved a big expensive coffin. It's a good sign of respect. That's illegal. That's coercion. Your genuine, just illegal, prohibited practices is having false closing down sales. If you're giving away free gifts, but you have to pay to get them. If you get a false prize from the lotto, maybe, or if you are sent something that you didn't buy and they ask you to pay for it, or if there's any false medical claims that say a vitamin can cure cancer. So the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, as per the CPA 2007, which we just had a look at, and the CCPC in the bottom left, they can issue a written undertaking, basically meaning a business has to stop doing illegal activities. They can give a compliance note to try and help the situation, or they can simply fine the business, or they can name and shame them in their consumer protection list. They can also prosecute a business that breaks an act within 2 years. A judge can impose a fine of up to €3,000, 6 months in prison, or both. I'm not 100% sure of the legalities. Obviously, laws change over time, but according to the textbook, this is the textbook definition. The main roles of the CCPC are to inform the consumers through their helpline and their website, to encourage good compliance among businesses that they don't break the law, and they also enforce consumer law from the fines or court cases that we saw earlier. They also advise the government to change their policy to help consumers. A small claims court is for claims under €2,000. It's very cheap. You don't need a solicitor. You can apply online or with a form that costs a very small fee. If the business accepts what they did wrong, you get compensation paid back. If they don't accept it and they dispute it, then the small claims registrar, excuse me, the small claims registrar will then review it and they will say what will have to be done. If they can't review it, it'll go to a judge and it'll go to court, and whatever decision they make is legally binding. The Ombudsman for Public Service is they handle complaints against public bodies like the HSE or the government departments or schools. It's free, it's independent, and it's impartial, meaning it doesn't judge, it doesn't take any sides. They can access files, they can interview staff, and they can recommend solutions. However, these solutions aren't legally binding. They don't have to follow out these solutions. However, if these solutions are ignored, this is reported to Dáil Éireann. For example, say Peter was applying for job seekers benefit, but it was rejected because apparently he was already in employment. He can go to the ombudsman and they investigate it, and they find that the Department of Social Protection actually made an error. So they can say, okay, Peter's okay, pay him job seekers. And then the Department of Social Protection will give him job seekers. So here's a couple of review questions for that. Finally, we're going to have a look at industrial relations and employer-employee conflict. Industrial relations is the relationship between employers and employees. This can be good or bad, and you can get conflict from poor pay or bad working conditions, any redundancies if you're fired, any promotions that other people get and you feel was unfair, or you can get pay disputes if someone's doing the same job and getting paid more, if someone's doing a similar job and getting paid more, if you think you should be paid more because of how much you're working, or just inflation and cost of living in general. So you have your non-legislative solutions, which is your negotiation, the same thing as last time. The workers and the employers talk it out. Or you can get your conciliation, which is an independent conciliator helps to reach an agreement. It's kind of like a therapist, they don't really have any power. Or you have arbitration, which is an independent arbitrator makes a decision like a referee. However, it's not legally binding. However, it is usually in most cases still followed. Trade unions are great examples of arbitrators. They represent the employees, and their functions is to negotiate for better pay and working conditions. They represent members in legal disputes. They provide information on consumer rights, employer rights, and employer working conditions. Each shop that has union members, they will have a shop steward. They're basically in charge of the trade union in that specific shop. They recruit new members, they represent the workers, and they will communicate with their trade union headquarters. The Irish Congress of Trade Unions, ICTU, is very important. They control all the trade unions in Ireland. They authorize all out strikes because you need permission from them. They will settle disputes between different unions if they're having arguments. They will provide training to shop stewards and employees based on their own rights, what they need to know, and they will also promote union movement, meaning they will fight for employers and they will work to get the best conditions possible. Your legislative solutions, you have your Industrial Relations Act 1990, which deals with strikes, your Workplace Relations Commission, which gives you a lot of services, your Labour Court, which deals with disputes and appeals, your Unfair Dismissals Act 1997 to 2015, which deals with unfair dismissals if you're fired or constructive dismissals, and you have your Employer Equality Act 1988 to 2015, which deals with discrimination. The Industrial Relations Act deals with strikes. A legal strike needs a secret ballot amongst the workers, and then you need to give a week's notice to your employer, and then you are only allowed to picket and protest peacefully. It also protects workers from legal action during legitimate disputes. So if your employer sues you for not working, you're protected by the Industrial Relations Act, and you can get legitimate disputes about your pay, your working conditions, if someone was unfairly dismissed, if someone was discriminated, or demotion, which is basically having to do jobs that aren't in your job description. You can also have a legal disputes about political issues, something that the government does, or a closed shop, meaning you're only allowed to go to one trade union, or just general disagreements with the business. These aren't causes for strikes. The Workplace Relations Commission, the WRC, they provide a bunch of services. They give a conciliation service. They help to settle disputes like the therapist. They give an advisory service and they try and promote good relations between employers and employees. They have an adjudication service. They can make a legally binding decision. They have a mediation service and they try and help reach an agreement between employers and employees. And they also have an inspection service. They make sure all the laws are being followed by employers. The labor court, they investigate disputes and they can give a non-binding recommendation, basically what they should do. They also hear appeals from the WRC. If something happens, they can send it to the labor court and they'll have a look at it. They can interpret code of practice. Basically, they can say what the business has to do and how they should follow that. And they also register a collective agreement. So if the employers and the employees come to an agreement, the labor court will sign that off and make it official. The Unfair Dismissals Act deals with people being fired unfairly. All dismissals are technically unfair unless you can prove otherwise. You have to have been employed for 1 year. However, there are exceptions for people who are pregnant, people who are under the age of 16, or people who are over the age of 65. A fair dismissal can be if you're not qualified for the job, if you're incompetent and you can't do the job, if you're incapable because maybe you're sick, if there's misconduct and you're not acting as you should, or if there's a genuine redundancy and the job isn't needed anymore. An unfair dismissal is based off if someone is pregnant, if someone's part of a trade union, someone's personal beliefs, their race, their age, their religion, being part of the traveler community, being gay, etc. And redress, your compensation, you can get reinstated, which is basically you get your job back and you get money back from not being in your job. You can get re-engagement, which is you get your job back, but you don't get money back. Or you can get compensation, which is basically you just get money back, but you don't get your job back. A constructive dismissal as well is an employee is forced to resign due to employer behavior. This might be the employers being very overbearing, overwhelming, and treating the employee unfairly. However, there was nothing legal that happened. They didn't fire them. It was more a matter of the employee was so stressed that they were forced to resign. This can also be argued in the Unfair Dismissals Act and they can get compensation. The Employment Equality Act deals with discrimination. You have 9 grounds: your gender, age, religion, if you're married or if you're in a family, your sexuality, if you're a traveler, if you have a disability, or your race. You can have direct discrimination. You can have indirect discrimination, which is basically, say there's a height restriction for a certain job, but that might not be as good for women because women are shorter than men, of course, on average. That would be indirect discrimination. You can have associated discrimination, which is where someone they know is part of the 9 grounds and you associate them with them. Or you can have imputation, which is when you think or assume or imply that someone is from someone somewhere. So if you have an employee who you think is part of the traveler community and you fire them because you have a suspicion, that's illegal, or harassment in general. Your remedy can be you get equal pay and back pay for being fired or being discriminated, and you can also get compensation up to 2 years' pay or 40,000. Again, not too sure on the exact numbers of the legalities, but this is textbook stuff. Your industrial action, you can have legal actions, which is your work to rule, which is essentially you only do what's in your contract, you don't do any extra jobs. Or you can do an overtime ban where you refuse to work overtime. This is really good for if you've ever seen the NHS in England, the nurses might do an overtime ban, which means they won't work any extra hours. And this can be really bad for services that rely on workers doing overtime. Or you can get a token stoppage, which is basically you stop working for a short amount of time, but not long enough that it becomes a legal issue. Your illegal actions is taking an unofficial strike or a wildcat strike, which is when you don't have a ballot, you don't give a notice, or you don't get it approved by ICTU, or a political strike, something that the government did and you protest against that. and the negative impacts of industrial action. Workers lose their pay, employers lose their profits on their workers, and consumers lose products and services. So here are your review questions for these. And that is all from Unit 1. It was very quick, very short. This is more so just a revision, a quick revision for anyone who needs a little extra top up on their memories, on their notes. I hope you all enjoyed. I will be back on Unit 2, Entrepreneurship, very soon. Thank you very much for watching.